"You're too thin to work," someone had whispered as the sun rose over the endless plains of West Texas, dust shimmering in the morning light, the air dry and heavy with heat. Jack Brennan stood on the porch of his ranch house, boots dusty, eyes narrowed at the horizon where a military truck rattled along the dirt road. Inside, a small group of German women prisoners had been transported from a distant camp, each step uncertain, their uniforms loose, and faces pale from weeks of poor rations and long confinement. Among them, one figure drew Jack's attention, a young woman named Liesel Weber, barely 20, her frame delicate, eyes wide, shoulders tense, and every movement careful as though the world itself could collapse beneath her. The truck doors clanged, and the women stepped onto the red clay, tentative, glancing at each other, then up at the barbed wire fences and the guard towers rising against the bright blue sky. Jack felt a quiet weight settle in his chest, not from authority, but from something older, something human. He watched as Liesel's knees bent slightly under the effort of each step, her hands clutching at her bag, and her face betrayed exhaustion beyond simple fatigue. Other POWs shuffled after her, some murmuring in German, some silent, their eyes flicking toward the guards for reassurance. Jack's foreman, Carl, stood beside him, wiping sweat from his brow. "She looks weaker than the others," Carl said softly. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the way Liesel paused, as if measuring the ground she walked on, as if deciding whether she could survive it. The heat pressed down like a tangible weight, the sun high above, casting long shadows across the dust-strewn yard. For a moment, no one moved. The world held its breath. Then Jack descended the steps, boots thudding against the wooden porch, and approached the line slowly, deliberately, his hands relaxed at his sides. Liesel's eyes flicked up, meeting his gaze, startled by the calm in a stranger's look, something entirely unlike the hurried commands or sharp tones she had endured before. He stopped a few feet away, scanning her, noting the tension in her back, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the set of her jaw that betrayed her determination despite the fragility of her body. "Water first," he said, his voice low, measured, carrying neither judgment nor pity. One of the guards handed him a canteen, and he extended it toward her. Liesel hesitated, lips parted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her eyes. Her hand trembled as it reached for the container, unsure if this was a trap, unsure if kindness could exist in a world she had been told was cruel. Jack took a sip himself first, tilting the canteen, letting the cool water slide down, showing no fear, no pretense, only a simple gesture of trust. Slowly, she followed, the liquid wet and sweet against her lips, and the first tiny sigh of relief escaped her chest. Around them, the other POWs watched, some still wary, some curious, all registering the unspoken message that this was not punishment, that this was a place where human decency could reach across the lines of war. Jack stepped back slightly, letting her adjust, letting the air between them fill with the quiet understanding that strength is not always measured in muscle, and survival sometimes begins with a single act of compassion. The wind stirred through the sparse trees, carrying with it the scent of sun-baked earth and cotton fields beyond the fence. Liesel took another cautious sip, feeling her pulse slow, her thoughts clearing from the fog of fear that had settled over weeks of confinement. The morning light glinted off her hair, revealing strands that had been dulled by dust, now catching the sun in fleeting gold. Jack watched, silent, as the first bridge of trust formed, an invisible thread stretching from his hands, to her eyes, a connection delicate but real. No words were needed beyond the canteen and the glance they shared. The camp remained still, the usual clamor replaced by the soft rhythm of her breathing and the distant murmur of the wind over the plains. Jack allowed the moment to linger, knowing that this small act, simple and human, carried weight far beyond the immediate task. Liesel's lips curved slightly, a ghost of a smile that had been buried under fear, and Jack nodded to himself, understanding that the work of the day could wait, that before labor there must be recognition of humanity, before orders there must be acknowledgement of dignity. And in that brief, quiet morning, under a sky so wide it seemed endless, the unlikeliest of lessons unfolded. Even in a world scarred by conflict, a cowboy's simple act could Shock not armies, but hearts, and teach them the measure of care that surpasses command. The morning heat intensified as Jack guided Liesel toward the small barn at the edge of the fields, its wooden walls weathered and warm from the sun, the scent of hay and animals mixing with the dusty air. She moved slowly, each step measured, her fingers brushing the coarse fabric of her uniform as if testing the weight of reality against expectation. Jack kept a pace beside her, boots sinking slightly into the red clay, hands relaxed but alert, eyes observing, not judging, noting the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her chest lifted with shallow breaths that betrayed fatigue beyond her years. Inside the barn, shafts of sunlight pierced gaps in the walls, catching motes of dust that floated like tiny lanterns in the air. He gestured toward a pile of clean straw, flattened to provide comfort, and she lowered herself onto it with hesitation, knees tucked close, fingers gripping the edges as if anchoring herself to something solid. Jack moved quietly to the corner where a small water barrel sat, dipping a clean cloth into the cool liquid and wringing it just enough to leave it damp. He handed it to her, a silent offer of relief. Liesel took it, her blue eyes wide, the first flicker of trust visible in the slight tilt of her head as she pressed the cloth to her face, the coolness drawing a faint sigh that Jack heard even above the creak of the barn door. Outside, the wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, rustling the sparse leaves and scattering shadows across the floorboards. Jack pulled a small tin of food from his pack, the aroma of cooked eggs and bacon rising in the barn, a quiet contrast to the muted sounds of the POWs moving through the yard beyond. He set the tin down gently beside her, kneeling to her level, opening the lid to reveal the warm meal without a word, his actions speaking volumes that the eyes could interpret but the lips had yet to form into speech. Liesel studied the meal, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features as she looked up at Jack, searching for a sign, any sign, that it was safe, that there was no ulterior motive hidden behind this act. Jack met her, gazed steadily, the sun glinting off his weathered hat, and tilted his head slightly, a subtle nod that invited her to partake, to step forward into a moment of normalcy she had scarcely known. Tentatively, she reached for the fork, her hands trembling as the first bite of food touched her lips, the texture and warmth unfamiliar, yet comforting, coaxing a small, almost inaudible exhale as she chewed carefully, savoring each mouthful as though memorizing the sensation. Jack watched silently, a gentle presence nearby, giving space while maintaining a quiet vigilance, aware of the delicate balance between freedom and fear, kindness and the learned suspicion of years. The barn door swung open with a soft groan as a breeze pushed in, carrying the distant hum of activity from the main house and fields, and Jack shifted slightly to allow more light to fall on her, illuminating the fine lines of worry and hope dancing across her face. She paused mid-bite, eyes meeting his once more, the tension in her shoulders easing imperceptibly as the shared understanding of human care passed between them, unspoken yet profound. Outside, a horse stamped its hoof, the sound grounding them in the rhythm of the ranch, a reminder that life continued in measured steps despite the echoes of war and displacement. Jack's voice remained soft, almost a whisper, "Take your time," and she nodded, a flicker of gratitude reaching her eyes, the first thread of connection forming between them, fragile but undeniable. As she ate, he began arranging simple tools nearby, setting brooms and buckets aside for later chores, providing her with tasks that were gentle, manageable, reinforcing autonomy while maintaining care. Liesel's movements became less hesitant, a small straightening of her back as she carried out the assigned tasks, each gesture a quiet assertion of presence, each nod to Jack a recognition that she could exist in this space safely. The sun climbed higher, casting warm golden light across the barn floor, highlighting the floating dust and the glint of Jack's watch, and the silence between them became comfortable, filled with the rhythm of breathing, movement, and the unspoken acknowledgement of shared humanity. By mid-morning, Liesel had eaten the majority of her meal, her hands steadier, her eyes brighter, and Jack allowed himself a subtle, approving glance, recognizing that the first step had been taken. Trust was forming, resilience was beginning, and the invisible barrier of fear had shifted ever so slightly, making room for the possibility of a day lived with dignity and care in a world still shaped by uncertainty. The morning light had climbed higher over the sprawling Texas plains, casting long, golden streaks across the fields and illuminating the dust that danced in the warm breeze. Jack guided Liesel out of the barn, her steps steadier now, though each movement still measured, as if testing the solidity of the ground beneath her boots. The red clay crunched softly underfoot, the sound mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the faint hum of a windmill turning lazily against the cloudless sky. He pointed toward the rows of cotton waiting to be harvested, the plants pale green and heavy with dew that glimmered in the sunlight. Liesel looked at the expanse before her, shoulders tensing for a moment before relaxing into the rhythm of anticipation rather than fear. Jack handed her a small basket, the weight light, and nodded toward the first row. Her fingers closed around the handle, the metal cool against her skin, and she took a careful step forward. Jack moved alongside her, boots sinking slightly into the soil, hands relaxed at his sides, watching her closely without interruption, allowing her to find her own balance between caution and action. The other POWs were scattered along adjacent rows, their movements precise and quiet, the sounds of shuffling feet and the rustle of cotton leaves filling the air without overwhelming it. Liesel bent at the waist, her fingers moving deliberately through the cotton, selecting blooms with care, the soft texture brushing against her palms. She lifted each handful to place in her basket, the motion fluid but restrained, as though each action required calculation and focus to maintain composure. Jack observed, noting the slight tremor in her hands diminishing with each movement, the tension in her shoulders easing gradually as the rhythm of work grounded her. The sun continued to climb, the warmth settling into the skin, and Jack provided intermittent water breaks. A simple canteen passed forward with a steady hand, ensuring she remained hydrated under the heat of the late morning. Liesel paused at the edge of a row, eyes flicking toward Jack, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through, as though the simple acknowledgement of presence had given her permission to exist in this space. Without fear, the wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of dry earth, hay, and distant cotton, and the barn behind them offered a cool shadow where she could rest if needed. Jack did not speak, letting the work and shared silence communicate the expectations, the safety, and the unspoken respect for her endurance. As hours passed, Liesel's movements grew more confident, her back straighter, her basket heavier with cotton gathered efficiently and with care. The sun climbed toward noon, and the warmth shifted from comforting to stifling. Yet Liesel's pace remained steady, guided by the quiet presence of Jack and the structured repetition of her task. At one point, she glanced toward him, a wordless question in her eyes, and he offered a small nod, an affirmation of capability and trust. Around them, the other POWs began to notice her growing ease, and a subtle change passed through the group, the tension that had accompanied a rival loosening in small, almost imperceptible increments. Jack directed her toward the shade of a lone oak for a brief rest, the coolness of the grass beneath her feet a relief from the relentless sun. Liesel breathed in slowly, feeling the rhythm of her body sync with the steady pulse of the land, the warmth of light and air blending into a sense of quiet endurance. He handed her a fresh piece of bread and a small slice of cheese, gestures repeated without fanfare, each act reinforcing the growing connection of trust and respect. She took the food with careful hands, eyes meeting his in a silent exchange, gratitude and relief mingling in the subtle shift of expression. The distant sounds of farm life, hooves striking the earth, the low murmur of a creek, the call of a bird overhead, filled the space between them, creating a rhythm that echoed the slow unfolding of familiarity and mutual understanding. By mid-afternoon, Liesel's energy had increased noticeably, her movements fluid, efficient, and precise, each action a testament to regained confidence and the gentle encouragement that had guided her from initial hesitation to measured competence. Jack stepped back, allowing the group to work independently, observing the harmony that had begun to form, the unspoken acknowledgement of human care that had shifted the dynamic entirely. The sun lowered slightly in the west, casting long shadows across the field, and Liesel paused, hands resting on the edge of her basket, eyes scanning. The horizon, absorbing the vast openness and the quiet power of being trusted and supported. The day continued with the unhurried rhythm of labor, punctuated by small gestures of attention, shared smiles, and moments of silent understanding, a quiet testament to the capacity for humanity to flourish even amidst the rigid structure and expectation of work in the sprawling Texas landscape. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose, the light stretching long shadows across the cotton fields. Liesel paused at the edge of her row, setting down her basket, and inhaled deeply, the scent of earth and growing plants mingling with the warm air, carrying a sense of familiarity that had been absent since her arrival. Jack stood nearby, leaning against a fence post, arms crossed, eyes tracing the pattern of her movements, noting the small but steady confidence that had begun to replace the initial hesitation. The other POWs worked in quiet, their focus unbroken, the rhythm of labor now interlaced with subtle glances and whispered words in English that Jack had encouraged them to practice, fostering small connections that bridged the gap of language and circumstance. He called out occasionally, his voice calm, measured, instructive but gentle, guiding Liesel to adjust the placement of the cotton in her basket, to bend with ease, to balance the weight without strain, each instruction a bridge of trust that extended beyond the task itself. The breeze stirred, carrying a hint of the nearby creek, the water glinting in the sunlight, reflecting the expanse of sky and the distant hills that marked the edge of the ranch. Liesel glanced toward the sound, a fleeting thought of water and freedom passing through her mind, a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond the fence and the possibilities that could exist within it. Jack moved beside her, demonstrating the proper technique for gathering cotton without undue effort, his hands guiding the space around hers without touching, allowing her to emulate the motion while retaining autonomy. She followed carefully, matching the rhythm, the coordination between instruction and action, developing a quiet understanding that went beyond words. The afternoon light grew warmer, the colors of the land deepening, and the faint rustle of leaves created a soft soundtrack to their labor. Liesel adjusted her hat against the sun, sweat beading at her brow, and Jack offered a fresh cloth and a nod of acknowledgement, a silent reinforcement that she was capable, observed, and supported. In the distance, a few horses moved lazily across the pastures, the sound of hooves striking the dry soil a grounding presence, and the occasional call of a bird punctuated the vast stillness. Jack and Liesel worked in tandem, the silent dialogue of gestures, glances, and measured movements creating a rhythm that resonated with the quiet dignity of the day. Periodically, he would offer a small piece of bread or a sip of water, actions repeated with consistency, each moment reinforcing the trust that had begun to form and the recognition that her strength was measured not only in labor, but in endurance and resilience. The other POWs began to notice the ease with which Liesel navigated the tasks, her movements purposeful, her attention to detail meticulous, and a subtle sense of admiration spread through the group, the air carrying an unspoken acknowledgement of perseverance. Jack allowed the moment to extend without interference, observing from a distance as Liesel completed her row, the basket heavier now with cotton collected efficiently, her posture upright, eyes brightening with a quiet satisfaction that had been absent only hours before. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden beams across the fields, the landscape transformed, the dust taking on a soft glow, the shadows of the cotton plants stretching like fingers across the soil, and Liesel stood at the end of her row, pausing to survey her work, the weight of accomplishment settling in her chest. Jack approached, hands in pockets, nodding slightly, an acknowledgement of effort and progress without a single word, the exchange carrying the weight of understanding and mutual respect. The day continued with steady labor, punctuated by moments of reflection, shared smiles, and the subtle interplay of trust and observation. The air filled with the quiet hum of life on the ranch, and Liesel moved through it with a growing confidence, each step measured, each gesture purposeful, the rhythm of work and the presence of care intertwining to create a space where human dignity could flourish even amid the structured expectation of duty and labor, the Texas plains stretching endlessly. Around them, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of those who walk its soil. The afternoon sun dipped lower, stretching the shadows of cotton plants across the warm red soil, the sky above turning a soft gradient of orange and pale pink, casting the ranch in a serene glow. Liesel paused mid-row, setting down her basket, her hands brushing against the smooth fabric of her uniform, noticing the subtle shift in the temperature and the way the light touched the fields. Jack stood nearby, leaning slightly on a wooden fence post, eyes scanning the horizon, the faint lines of concern and attentiveness visible in the creases around his eyes. He watched as Liesel straightened, shoulders loosening, the weight of uncertainty gradually giving way to the rhythm of the day's work. The distant murmur of a creek and the occasional call of a bird filled the air, punctuating the quiet focus of the POWs scattered across the fields, their movements measured and precise. Jack approached Liesel, speaking softly, his voice steady but warm, guiding her to adjust her grip on the basket, to lift the cotton blooms with ease, to distribute the weight evenly, each instruction designed not only to teach but to instill confidence. She followed carefully, the subtle rhythm of her movements beginning to mirror his, a silent conversation of gestures and glances forming between them, unspoken but deeply understood. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of hay from the barn and the earthy aroma of the fields, mingling with the heat that pressed gently against their skin, creating a sense of presence, grounding them in the moment. Jack reached into his satchel and handed Liesel a small piece of cloth dampened with cool water, a simple gesture, and she pressed it to her forehead, closing her eyes briefly, the relief passing through her in a quiet exhale. She looked at him, a flicker of trust in her gaze, and Jack nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the connection that had formed without fanfare or words, a bridge of humanity that extended across language and circumstance. The other POWs began to notice the subtle shift in her posture and expression, the ease with which she now handled the tasks that had seemed overwhelming only hours before. Liesel moved along her row with purpose, lifting each bloom, inspecting the quality, placing them in her basket with growing confidence, the rhythm of her work becoming steady, deliberate, a quiet testament to adaptation and resilience. Jack walked beside her intermittently, offering guidance, a nod of approval, a quiet observation. The exchange reinforcing the sense of structure and care that enveloped the day. The sun continued its descent, bathing the land in golden light, the shadows stretching longer, and Liesel took a brief pause to survey the field, the rows of cotton now marked with her efforts, a visual reminder of progress and perseverance. Jack gestured toward the water troughs and the shade beneath the oak trees, encouraging a break, and she approached, hands gripping the edge of the trough, taking in the coolness and the comfort of a pause in the work, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet and the warmth of the sun on her back. The breeze carried the faint sound of cattle lowing in the distance, a steady, grounding presence that harmonized with the quiet exertion of labor, the rhythm of breath and movement, creating a sense of continuity and calm. Jack handed her a small portion of bread and a piece of cheese, gestures repeated with consistency, reinforcing the growing trust and understanding between them, each act deliberate, measured, and kind. Liesel took the food with hands steady now, the simple nourishment offering a sense of security and care, her eyes meeting his with a shared understanding that extended beyond words, a recognition of support and presence. The shadows lengthened, the lights softened, and the field took on a golden hue that seemed to embrace both labor and rest, the day unfolding with a steady, measured pace that allowed reflection, connection, and the quiet reinforcement of human dignity. Liesel straightened, adjusted her basket, and resumed her work with renewed focus, the rhythm of gathering cotton flowing naturally, each movement confident and deliberate, the partnership between her and Jack now unspoken but fully understood, a shared experience of guidance, trust, and the subtle, enduring strength found in kindness extended and accepted under the wide, endless Texas sky. The late afternoon sun lowered further, casting a warm, golden haze across the wide Texas plains, the shadows of the cotton plants stretching long and thin across the red soil. Liesel paused at the end of her row, setting down her basket and wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Noticing the subtle shift in the air as the day began to cool and the breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the distant fields. Jack stood nearby, leaning casually against the fence post, eyes scanning the horizon, taking in the rhythm of the fields and the careful movements of the POWs as they worked, his posture relaxed yet attentive, hands resting loosely at his sides. Liesel lifted the basket, adjusting her grip, and resumed gathering the cotton, her movements smooth and deliberate, the morning hesitations replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. The other POWs continued their work, the sound of shuffling feet and the soft rustle of leaves mingling with the distant lowing of cattle, the faint hum of the windmill turning lazily against the sky, adding a gentle rhythm to the afternoon. Jack walked beside Liesel, his pace unhurried, pointing out subtle adjustments, the angle of her hands, the way she lifted each bloom, guiding without touching, allowing her autonomy, while reinforcing the growing sense of competence and trust. The sunlight caught strands of her hair, highlighting the fine gold in her dark blonde, and her eyes, a soft blue, reflected the sky above, widening slightly as she lifted a heavier load of cotton with ease, the effort now measured, almost effortless. Jack nodded subtly, approving, a quiet acknowledgement of her progress, and she returned a small, almost imperceptible smile, the gesture a mutual understanding of shared purpose and recognition. The wind stirred more strongly, carrying the scent of dry earth, hay, and cotton, rustling leaves and lifting the faint dust from the soil, and Liesel paused to take a breath, pressing her hands against her knees, inhaling deeply, the rhythm of the land grounding her. Jack remained beside her, watching, speaking occasionally in soft, steady tones, offering guidance, encouragement, and subtle adjustments, each word measured, reinforcing trust without intrusion. The other POWs began to observe the small, quiet exchanges, the way the tasks were approached with careful attention and precision, a subtle change in their own demeanor as the model of calm and competence unfolded before them. Liesel straightened, shoulders relaxed, eyes focused, and began moving along the row with renewed steadiness, the basket growing heavier, each motion fluid and controlled, her back straight, hands efficient, a sense of pride and capability growing with every step. Jack moved to the edge of the field, observing the collective effort, the soft coordination between guidance and independence creating a rhythm that extended across the rows, a quiet harmony born of patient instruction and careful attention. As the sun dipped lower, the light softened, and the colors of the land deepened into warm ambers and soft pinks, the long shadows stretching across the cotton and the clay. Liesel paused once more, taking in the vastness of the fields, the quiet presence of Jack, and the sense of calm accomplishment that filled the space between them. She adjusted the basket on her hip, breathing evenly, feeling the subtle ache of exertion tempered by the satisfaction of completed work and the knowledge that she had gained more than just experience in the field. She had gained a sense of belonging, trust, and human connection. The distant sounds of farm life, the lowing of cattle, the occasional creak of the windmill, the soft flutter of leaves, created a comforting backdrop to the labor and reflection, grounding her in the continuity of the ranch and the rhythm of life that had resumed in the wake of arrival. Jack offered a final nod, a quiet acknowledgement that the work of the afternoon had been met with diligence and care, and Liesel returned the gesture, eyes meeting his in a moment of silent communication that conveyed gratitude, recognition, and the subtle strength that comes from being seen, guided, and supported in a place that had once seemed foreign and intimidating. The sun continued to lower, the field bathed in long, gentle light, the cotton swaying softly with the breeze, and Liesel continued her work, each step purposeful, each motion deliberate, the quiet cadence of the land, the labor, and the guidance intertwining to form a seamless flow of endurance, care, and human dignity under the wide, open Texas sky. The late afternoon settled into a softer glow as Jack guided Liesel toward a small grove at the edge of the fields, where the shadows of oak trees stretched long across the warm red clay, offering a brief respite from the relentless sun. The air carried the scent of dry earth and distant wildflowers, mingling with the faint aroma of cotton and hay, a subtle reminder of the rhythm of life on the ranch. Liesel adjusted the basket on her hip, feeling the weight more comfortably now, the muscles in her arms and back no longer trembling with uncertainty, but working in measured, steady motion. Jack walked beside her, boots sinking slightly into the soil, eyes scanning the rows and the horizon, watching the interplay of sunlight and shadow across the fields, and noticing the growing ease in her movements, the careful way she bent and lifted, the precision with which she selected the blooms. A soft breeze stirred the grove, rustling the leaves above, carrying a hint of coolness, and Jack gestured toward a patch of shade where she could rest, kneeling briefly to adjust the brim of her hat to shield her eyes from the slanting sun. She crouched slightly, inhaling the warm, fragrant air, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease, the rhythm of labor giving way to the gentle pulse of observation and reflection. Jack spoke in measured, calm tones, guiding her hands to adjust the way she held the basket, to balance the load evenly, and to take note of the subtle cues in the plants beneath her fingers, demonstrating patience and care without intrusion, letting her autonomy remain intact. The other POWs continued their work quietly, the shuffle of feet, the soft rustle of cotton, and the distant lowing of cattle forming a muted soundtrack, punctuated by the occasional bird call drifting across the fields, creating a gentle cadence that harmonized with their measured labor. Liesel lifted each bloom with careful attention, placing it in her basket with a rhythm that grew more confident by the minute, the movements fluid, deliberate, and almost instinctual as she began to anticipate the steps, adjusting her stance, her grip, and the angle of her back with a precision that reflected both learning and self-assurance. Jack walked beside her intermittently, offering a nod, a soft word of encouragement and subtle guidance, reinforcing the trust and understanding that had grown between them over the day. The sun continued to lower, turning the sky into a canvas of warm amber and rose, the light catching the fine strands of her hair, glinting in gold, and highlighting the determination in her soft blue eyes. She paused briefly to survey the field, her chest rising and falling steadily, and for a moment, she allowed herself a quiet breath of satisfaction at the progress she had made. The accomplishment small but meaningful, a testament to resilience and adaptability. Jack observed silently, the weight of responsibility balanced by pride in her effort, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared purpose hanging between them, a quiet agreement that care and patience could yield tangible results in ways that commands never could. The grove offered a patch of respite, the grass beneath her feet cool, the shadows lengthening, and Liesel took the opportunity to drink from a canteen Jack handed her, the water cool and refreshing, grounding her in the moment, reinforcing the connection of trust that had formed through the steady, deliberate pace of labor and observation. The afternoon continued, the sun tilting westward, the shadows stretching longer across the fields, and the gentle rhythm of work persisted, punctuated by moments of instruction, acknowledgement, and subtle, deliberate gestures of care. Liesel moved through her tasks with growing confidence, her back straight, hands steady, each motion purposeful and precise, her awareness of the land, the light, and the presence of Jack creating a seamless flow of effort and observation. The distant sounds of life on the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the stir of leaves, the faint hum of the windmill, created a backdrop of continuity and calm, reinforcing the sense of presence and stability. Jack's quiet, attentive guidance allowed her to develop a steady rhythm, the shared space of labor and observation forming a bond of trust, patience, and human connection, a small sanctuary of dignity and perseverance beneath the vast, open Texas sky. The sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting the wide Texas plains in deep amber and soft pink, stretching shadows of the cotton plants and fence lines across the red soil. Liesel paused at the edge of her row, adjusting the weight of her basket, feeling the strain in her arms balanced by the growing strength of practiced motion, and inhaled deeply, drawing in the warm, fragrant air that carried hints of earth, hay, and distant wildflowers. Jack walked beside her, boots settling into the clay with steady steps, eyes watching the subtle changes in her posture, the way her movements had become confident, precise, and controlled over the course of the day. He gestured toward the remaining rows, tilting his hat to shade his eyes from the sun, signaling the approach of the final stretch before the break. Liesel nodded, the quiet acknowledgement passing between them without a word, a shared understanding of effort, progress, and care. As she moved along, her fingers brushed the cotton with deliberate attention, selecting each bloom with precision, placing it into her basket in a rhythm that now matched the cadence of her breathing and the subtle pulse of the land. The other POWs worked. Nearby, the soft rustle of leaves and the shuffle of feet providing a gentle backdrop, the hum of activity punctuated by the distant lowing of cattle and the faint creak of the windmill turning lazily in the warm afternoon air. Jack stayed close, speaking occasionally in calm, measured tones, offering guidance, reinforcing her confidence without intrusion, demonstrating technique and attention to detail, allowing her autonomy while providing the subtle reassurance of presence and care. The light shifted as the sun continued its descent, the shadows growing longer, the temperature dropping just enough to offer relief, and the breeze stirred gently, brushing against Liesel's hair and bringing a fleeting coolness to her skin. She paused briefly, adjusting the basket, her blue eyes lifting to the sky, taking in the wide expanse of the ranch, the orderly rows of cotton, and the grove that marked the edge of the fields, feeling a sense of accomplishment begin to take root. Jack moved closer, offering a small canteen of water, and Liesel accepted it with careful hands, drinking slowly, the liquid refreshing and grounding, reinforcing the growing trust between them. Around them, the POWs began to notice the shift in the energy of the field, the steady rhythm and quiet collaboration that had emerged, the way instruction, observation, and patient guidance created a space of mutual respect and subtle harmony. Liesel's steps became more assured as she returned to the remaining rows, her movements fluid and deliberate, each lift and placement of cotton precise and purposeful, the cadence of labor now steady and confident. Jack occasionally offered a nod of approval or a quiet comment, his attention unwavering yet unobtrusive, the interaction forming a silent dialogue that emphasized trust, care, and dignity. The afternoon sun painted the fields in warm, golden light, glinting off the cotton blooms and the strands of Liesel's hair, highlighting the soft determination in her expression. The grove at the edge of the field provided intermittent shade, and Jack encouraged brief pauses, allowing her to rest and refresh while maintaining the continuity of the work and observation. Liesel's small, deliberate gestures, the careful handling of the cotton, and the measured rhythm of her steps demonstrated the gradual transformation from hesitation to competence, from uncertainty to confidence, each motion a testament to the quiet power of patience, guidance, and human kindness. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth, and the long shadows of the trees and cotton plants stretched across the field, softening the light and emphasizing the vastness of the land. Jack and Liesel continued in tandem, the silent, steady rhythm of labor, attention, and observation creating a space where trust, understanding, and dignity could flourish. The day continued with this unbroken cadence, each action deliberate, each motion purposeful, a quiet celebration of endurance, human connection, and the gentle strength of guidance, paired with growing capability beneath the expansive, open Texas sky. The sun had begun to settle closer to the horizon, casting a deep golden glow across the expansive Texas plains, the long shadows of cotton rows stretching lazily across the warm, red soil, blending with the subtle pinks and oranges of the fading sky. Liesel paused mid-row, adjusting the weight of her basket, and took a moment to inhale deeply, the air fragrant with the scent of dry earth, cotton, and distant wildflowers carried gently on the breeze. Jack stood nearby, leaning against a fence post, boots planted firmly in the soil, eyes attentive but relaxed, observing her movements and the growing ease in her posture, the careful rhythm she had established over the course of the afternoon. He gestured toward a slightly higher row of cotton, tilting his hat against the sun, signaling for her to continue, and Liesel nodded, a faint sense of anticipation and determination reflected in her gaze. As she moved along the row, her hands brushed over the cotton blooms with precision, lifting each with deliberate attention, placing them into her basket with a rhythm that matched her breathing, each movement flowing smoothly into the next. The other POWs worked quietly in the surrounding rows, the soft shuffle of feet and the rustle of cotton leaves blending with the distant lowing of cattle and the hum of a windmill turning lazily against the warm sky, creating a gentle, consistent backdrop to the labor. Jack walked alongside Liesel intermittently, speaking in calm, measured tones, providing guidance and subtle encouragement without intrusion, pointing out minor adjustments in grip or posture, reinforcing her confidence while allowing her independence and self-direction to remain intact. The light shifted subtly as the sun lowered, illuminating her hair with a warm glow, highlighting the strength in her blue eyes and the careful determination etched across her face. Liesel paused briefly at the end of a row, setting down her basket and bending to smooth the soil around the base of the plants, the faint creak of her boots against the clay echoing softly, blending with the distant sounds of farm life. Jack handed her a canteen of water, and she drank slowly, the cool liquid refreshing and grounding, a small exhale escaping her lips as her hands rested on her knees, shoulders relaxing further in the gentle warmth of the late afternoon. Around them, the other POWs began to register the subtle shifts in energy and movement, the quiet confidence emerging, the precision and care in each gesture becoming more noticeable, fostering a sense of calm and collaboration across the field. Liesel lifted her basket again, adjusted her grip, and returned to the remaining rows, each motion deliberate, purposeful, and steady, her confidence evident in the fluidity of her actions and the careful attention she paid to each bloom. Jack observed silently, offering the occasional nod or quiet word, the interaction forming a subtle dialogue of trust, understanding, and human connection. The breeze stirred, carrying the mixed scent of earth, hay, and cotton, the long shadows stretching further as the sun approached the horizon, painting the field in rich, warm hues that softened the lines of labor and accentuated the gentle cadence of the work. Liesel moved along steadily, her back straight, hands sure, each motion a testament to learned skill and developing independence, her presence marking a subtle transformation from tentative uncertainty to purposeful engagement. Jack walked beside her, his eyes observing, noting the balance of effort and grace in her movements, the careful attention to rhythm and placement reflecting a growing sense of mastery and comfort within the space. The late light highlighted the tops of the cotton, the rows gleaming softly, and the grove at the edge of the field offered a patch of cool shade where Liesel could pause when needed. She stopped briefly, looking toward the horizon, the warm glow reflecting in her eyes, and took a measured breath, the sensation of calm endurance filling her chest. Jack remained close, offering reassurance through presence rather than words, allowing the moment to linger, the silent understanding between them reinforcing the quiet bond of trust and respect. The day continued in this steady rhythm, the labor, guidance, observation, and subtle gestures of care interweaving seamlessly, creating a space where resilience, human dignity, and quiet connection flourished beneath the expansive Texas sky, each motion and breath a reflection of growing confidence and the gentle, enduring power of attentiveness and kindness. The sun hung low over the Texas plains, painting the wide fields in a rich palette of gold, amber, and soft crimson, the long shadows of the cotton rows stretching toward the distant fence lines, blending with the subtle hues of the late afternoon. Liesel stood at the edge of a row, adjusting the basket on her hip, the rhythm of her movements now steady, deliberate, each motion reflecting the hours of patient guidance and careful attention that had shaped her confidence throughout the day. Jack moved beside her, boots sinking slightly into the warm clay, hands resting loosely at his sides, eyes observing the subtle shifts in her posture, the way her shoulders had straightened, the careful precision in her fingers as they selected the cotton blooms, and the steady cadence of her breathing as she navigated the rows. The other POWs continued their work in quiet, the soft shuffle of feet and the rustle of cotton leaves forming a gentle background, punctuated occasionally by the low murmur of distant cattle or the faint creak of the windmill spinning lazily against the warm sky. Jack spoke in calm, measured tones, offering small, unobtrusive guidance, a suggestion to adjust her stance, a nod to shift her balance. His instructions delivered with quiet patience that allowed Liesel to internalize the movements and develop her own rhythm, the trust between them deepening without a single word being necessary. The air carried the faint scent of hay, cotton, and dry earth, mingling with the warmth of the sun that had softened as it dipped closer to the horizon, creating long, cool shadows where Liesel could pause if needed. She crouched briefly to adjust the basket, her hands moving confidently over the cotton, selecting blooms with care, her attention now fully present in the task at hand, the nervousness of earlier hours replaced by quiet focus and a sense of personal agency. Jack walked beside her intermittently, offering nods of approval, brief words of guidance, and subtle encouragement, the steady cadence of their interactions reinforcing the lessons of trust, patience, and attention to detail. The sunlight caught strands of her hair, highlighting the soft gold interwoven with darker tones, and her blue eyes reflected the sky, widening slightly as she bent to lift a heavier section of cotton with ease, the effort measured, deliberate, and confident. She paused briefly, taking a sip from the canteen Jack handed her, the cool water refreshing and grounding, allowing her to rest and absorb the vastness of the fields around her, the gentle rhythm of life on the ranch settling into a quiet harmony. The grove at the edge of the field offered intermittent shade, the long shadows creating patterns on the ground, and Liesel used the break to straighten her back, inhaling deeply, letting the warmth of the day and the steady encouragement of Jack fill her with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The other POWs began to notice the subtle transformation in her demeanor, the way her movements flowed smoothly, the precision and care in each gesture creating a quiet model of confidence and resilience that extended across the field. Jack remained nearby, attentive but unobtrusive, observing the interaction between guidance and independence, the trust and patience translating into competence and calm. The sun continued to descend, casting the fields in a soft, golden glow, the long shadows stretching further, the air cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the land and the gentle rustle of leaves, punctuated by the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Liesel lifted her basket again, moving with purpose along the final rows, each step measured, each motion deliberate, the cadence of work and observation creating a rhythm that was both steady and graceful. Jack allowed her space while maintaining a presence of quiet support, nodding occasionally, offering small gestures of encouragement, reinforcing the connection of trust and understanding that had developed through the long afternoon. The lights softened further as the sun neared the horizon, illuminating the cotton and the figures in the fields in warm, amber tones, and Liesel moved through the space with confidence, care, and a quiet awareness of the growing bond between effort, guidance, and recognition. The distant sounds of the ranch, lowing cattle, the rustle of leaves, and the soft hum of the windmill created a serene backdrop, reinforcing the rhythm of labor, reflection, and subtle human connection that had transformed the space into one where patience, care, and dignity flourished. Each motion of her hands, each deliberate step, reflected the lessons absorbed and the quiet strength gained, the Texas plains stretching endlessly around them, the warm light, wrapping the scene in calm, steady closure for the day. The sun had nearly reached the horizon, casting the Texas plains in long, warm shadows, the cotton fields glowing in shades of amber and soft orange, the dust from the day settling lightly over the soil. Liesel paused at the edge of her row, hands resting on the handle of her basket, breathing slowly, feeling the subtle ache of exertion mingled with a growing sense of accomplishment. Jack walked beside her, boots pressing into the clay with steady cadence, hands relaxed, eyes attentive to every small movement, noting the precision in her fingers, the steadiness in her posture, the quiet determination that had emerged over hours of labor. The other POWs worked in the surrounding fields, the soft shuffle of feet and rustle of cotton leaves creating a gentle, consistent background rhythm, punctuated only by the distant lowing of cattle and the faint creak of the windmill turning slowly in the warm breeze. Jack offered occasional, measured guidance, a suggestion to adjust the angle of her body, a quiet word about lifting or balancing the basket, each instruction delivered in calm, deliberate tones, allowing Liesel to internalize and adapt without pressure, reinforcing trust and competence simultaneously. The late afternoon light caught strands of her hair, illuminating the soft gold mixed with darker tones, highlighting the subtle lines of focus around her blue eyes as she moved through the cotton rows with increasing confidence. She bent and lifted with ease, each motion flowing naturally into the next, the rhythm of labor aligning with her breathing, her movements deliberate and assured. Jack stepped back slightly, observing the quiet harmony of work, the mutual understanding formed through careful guidance and patient attention, the unspoken language of gestures, nods, and glances creating a strong but understated connection. The breeze shifted, carrying scents of dry earth, hay, and cotton, brushing against Liesel's skin and stirring the fine dust from the soil, a gentle reminder of the day's passing. She paused momentarily, hands resting on her knees, inhaling deeply, appreciating the vast expanse around her, the rhythm of the land, and the work blending into a sense of calm endurance. Jack handed her a canteen of water, and she drank slowly, the cool liquid refreshing, grounding her, and further reinforcing the trust that had grown between them. The shadows lengthened, the fields bathed in warm, golden light that softened the harsh lines of labor, and Liesel resumed her work with renewed focus, each motion precise, measured, and confident. The other POWs took note of the subtle transformation in her demeanor, the ease and grace with which she handled her tasks, the quiet competence that had developed throughout the afternoon, creating a ripple effect of calm and careful attention across the field. Jack remained nearby, silent but present, allowing her autonomy to guide the flow of labor, intervening only when necessary, his presence a steady anchor amidst the subtle shifts of energy and focus. The sun sank further, the sky a gradient of soft gold and muted pink, shadows stretching across the cotton and soil, and Liesel moved along the rows with deliberate care, the cadence of her actions precise, the rhythm of her labor matching the quiet pulse of the land. Jack observed, acknowledging each gesture, each adjustment, each careful step, the silent communication between them carrying weight beyond words, reinforcing trust, patience, and the shared understanding that had grown throughout the day. The late light cast long patterns on the fields, highlighting the effort, endurance, and quiet transformation that had taken place, each motion a testament to resilience, care, and the subtle strength that emerges from guidance paired with growing competence. Liesel adjusted the basket once more, inhaling deeply, and continued through the final rows with measured focus, each movement deliberate, purposeful, and confident, her attention fully present, and the expansive Texas landscape around them offering both challenge and serenity, a backdrop of enduring beauty and calm that framed the quiet achievements of the day. The sun had nearly touched the horizon, painting the sky in deep amber and soft lavender hues that reflected across the wide Texas plains, the long shadows of the cotton rows stretching lazily over the red soil. Liesel paused for a moment, setting down her basket and brushing her hair back from her forehead, feeling the lingering warmth of the day and the gentle fatigue that came from hours of steady labor. Jack walked beside her, boots sinking slightly into the clay, eyes calm yet attentive, observing her posture, the fluidity of her movements, and the quiet determination that had grown steadily since morning. The other POWs continued their tasks in the surrounding rows, the soft shuffle of feet and rustle of cotton leaves creating a gentle, constant background, punctuated by the distant lowing of cattle and the faint hum of the windmill turning slowly in the warm evening air. Jack spoke quietly, his voice low and measured, suggesting small adjustments in technique, a gentle reminder to lift with care, to balance the basket evenly, to pay attention to the rhythm of the work, each instruction reinforcing trust and competence without intrusion. Liesel lifted the cotton blooms with precision, placing them carefully into her basket, her hands moving with steady confidence, her attention fully present, every motion reflecting the careful learning and patient guidance of the day. The breeze carried the mixed scents of earth, hay, and cotton, brushing lightly against her skin, offering a fleeting coolness in contrast to the lingering warmth of the sun, and she paused to take a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs and steady her posture. Jack moved closer briefly, handing her a canteen of water, which she accepted with careful hands, drinking slowly, the cool liquid providing refreshment and a grounding sense of calm. The late light accentuated the contours of the fields, highlighting the texture of the cotton blooms, the smooth stretch of soil, and the subtle curves of the landscape, the long shadows and soft glow creating a serene, almost meditative atmosphere. Liesel resumed her work, each motion deliberate and efficient, the rhythm of her labor now fully synchronized with the gentle pulse of the land, the quiet cadence of the afternoon folding seamlessly into the evening. Jack observed silently, nodding occasionally, offering small gestures of acknowledgement, the steady presence reinforcing the subtle bond of trust and understanding that had developed throughout the day. The POWs nearby noticed the difference, the ease in Liesel's movements, the confidence that now guided her hands, and a quiet energy seemed to ripple across the rows, the work of each woman harmonizing with the calm rhythm that had been cultivated through patient instruction and consistent encouragement. The sun continued its descent, the sky deepening into warm shades of amber and soft violet, the shadows stretching longer across the cotton and the ground, and Liesel moved steadily, confidently, through the remaining rows, her movements fluid, controlled, and precise, reflecting the strength and resilience that had emerged under careful guidance. Jack allowed her space, observing the subtle shifts in posture and expression, noting the careful balance between effort and ease, the growing assurance in each motion, and the quiet strength that had taken root through repeated attention, patience, and support. The grove at the edge of the field offered occasional shade, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze creating a gentle background, and Liesel used each pause to steady her breathing, adjusting her grip on the basket, and continuing with measured, purposeful steps, each motion a reflection of growing capability and confidence. The late evening air carried the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant creak of the windmill, and the soft calls of birds returning home, melding with the gentle rhythm of labor, observation, and guidance, creating a quiet symphony of work, care, and endurance. Each motion Liesel made, each deliberate step, reflected the lessons learned, the trust established, and the subtle bond formed between guidance and independence, the expansive Texas sky above stretching endlessly, framing a day where patience, attentiveness, and quiet human connection had flourished amid the vast, open land. The sun had finally settled near the horizon, bathing the Texas plains in a deep, warm glow of amber and soft violet, stretching the shadows of the cotton rows across the red clay in long, gentle lines that spoke of the day's passage. Liesel paused at the edge of her last row, setting down her now full basket with a soft thud, hands brushing against the sturdy handle as she drew in a slow, deep breath, the warm air carrying the faint scent of earth, hay, and cotton, mingled with the lingering coolness of a late breeze. Jack walked beside her, boots pressing softly into the soil, hands relaxed, eyes observing the final movements of the POWs as they completed their tasks, noting the quiet concentration in Liesel's posture, the steady rhythm in her fingers, and the softening tension in her shoulders that had gradually eased over the hours. The other women continued their work with the same quiet diligence, the shuffle of feet and rustle of cotton leaves forming a gentle, continuous backdrop, punctuated occasionally by the low hum of the windmill and the distant, mellow calls of birds settling for the evening. Jack spoke in calm, measured tones, offering subtle guidance and acknowledgement, a nod here, a quiet suggestion there, reinforcing the trust and confidence that had grown throughout the day without disturbing the flow of labor. Liesel bent carefully, adjusting the final handfuls of cotton in her basket, her movements fluid and deliberate, the rhythm of work now natural, almost instinctive, reflecting the patience, instruction, and human connection that had shaped her understanding of the space and the tasks. The light shifted again as the sun lowered further, bathing the landscape in a soft, golden glow, highlighting the contours of the fields, the texture of the cotton blooms, and the delicate lines of concentration and focus on Liesel's face. She paused briefly, setting the basket down, letting her eyes travel across the field, absorbing the vastness of the plains, the long rows she had tended, and the quiet harmony that had emerged among the POWs under Jack's attentive guidance. Jack moved closer, offering a small canteen of water, which Liesel accepted with careful hands, drinking slowly, the cool liquid refreshing and grounding, reinforcing the calm confidence that had been cultivated over the day. The grove at the edge of the field provided occasional shade, the long shadows of the trees stretching across the soil, and Liesel took a moment to rest, adjusting her posture, letting the gentle breeze wash over her, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a day well managed and a task completed with care. The POWs nearby observed the subtle yet meaningful transformation, the steady, confident movements, the measured rhythm that had developed, and a quiet sense of accomplishment seemed to ripple across the field, a reflection of guidance, patience, and the small victories of human connection. Jack remained present, silent but attentive, observing the delicate balance between effort, care, and the quiet growth of competence, the subtle bond that had formed through repeated acts of patience and attention, a shared understanding that needed no words. The sun dipped lower, the colors of the sky deepening into rich shades of amber, rose, and muted purple, long shadows stretching across the cotton and soil, and Liesel resumed her final checks, adjusting the baskets, straightening the rows, her movements deliberate, calm, and confident, a testament to endurance, adaptability, and the careful cultivation of trust. The sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft stir of leaves, and the gentle hum of the windmill formed a serene backdrop, a quiet rhythm echoing the day's work and the slow unfolding of human connection. Each step Liesel took, each precise motion of her hands, reflected the lessons she had absorbed, the trust she had earned, and the quiet strength that had grown through guidance, patience, and attention. The expansive Texas sky stretched endlessly above, framing a day of diligence, care, and quiet transformation, the warm light wrapping the fields and figures in a calm embrace, leaving a lingering sense of human dignity, subtle resilience, and the enduring impact of simple acts of trust and kindness that would remain long after the sun had set.